Trump's business get the corporate death penalty? And what got me going on this was a quote from Leticia James, who's the Attorney General of the state of New York. Or actually, it wasn't a quote. It was attributed to her or her office that by the New York media, the business media, that she, or at least the Attorney General's office, is looking into the corporate death penalty for the Trump Organization. Now, there's already a criminal indictment for Alan Weisselberg. He is the head guy there. He's going to go on trial next month, or maybe it's in October, either September or October, in the next 60 days, shall we say, or 90 days. And that's going to be real interesting, particularly as it gets closer, whether he decides to flip on the Don. You know, he may be afraid of finding a horse's head in his bed. I don't know. We'll see. But Leticia James is not pursuing a criminal investigation as the Attorney General. That is being pursued by what's her name? Trish Willis? No, Willis is her last name. Fani Willis, that's right, down in Atlanta, the district attorney for Fulton County. She's looking into, you know, criminal the election tampering by Donald Trump. You know, his call, can you just find 11,000 more votes, please? That is a felony, so she's looking into that. And the New York Attorney General, or the New York DA, who, you know, when he first came into office said he was going to drop the investigation. Now he says he's still doing the investigation. Nobody really knows what's going on for sure with the criminal investigation of Trump there. But in any case, Leticia James's office, it is being reported, is thinking of using the corporate death penalty against the Trump Organization. So what's the corporate death penalty? Well, corporate law has really changed in the United States and around the world. Most of the world has pretty much followed the United States over the last 150 years. I mean, really consequentially changed. The modern day business corporation literally did not exist before 1600. And in December of 1601, December 1st, 1601, Queen Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, signed the Articles of Incorporation for the second modern corporation. The first one that she had signed was 2 years earlier. It was to incorporate a ship, the Golden Hind, Sir Francis Drake's ship. And the whole point of it was so that people could invest in it, and if something went wrong, the maximum amount of money that they could lose was their investment. So if he had, you know, somehow done something that caused his corporation to end up massively in debt, they wouldn't have to pay more than the money they put in. That was the maximum of their risk. And that's why corporations are sometimes referred to as limited liability corporations. Your liability is limited to your investment. So if you've got a $1 billion corporation and you buy $1,000 worth of stock, and that $1 billion corporation gets sued and suddenly they owe $5 billion in some kind of a penalty, you still only can lose your $1,000 investment. That's it. You won't have to pay $5,000. So she did that with the Golden Hind in I think it was 1599. And in 1601, in December of 1601, she incorporated the British East India Company, which became the world's largest corporation. It was the corporation that whose misbehavior and a giant tax cut for them in 1773, the Tea Act of 1773, kicked off the Boston Tea Party, an act of vandalism against the world's largest corporation, protesting the tax cut, this giant corporate tax cut that would have allowed the East India Company to put out of business hundreds of small tea vendors in New England. And the people rose up and said no. So that corporation type largely did not exist in the United States at that time. And there was a lot of hostility towards corporations in general. It wasn't until around the time of the Civil War. There were a few corporations by that time. We were starting to see, you know, the railroads coming along, steel and things like that. And so we had some corporations that were limited liability corporations. But throughout that period of time, from the 1790s to the 1860s, and really up until the 1880s, first of all, corporations can't be federally chartered. I mean, there are a few exceptions, Amtrak, for example, but the federally chartered corporations are the exception. So corporations are chartered by the states. And every state in the Union, up until the 1880s, required that a corporation could not live for more than 40 years. And that way, at the end of, some states it was, in Pennsylvania, it was 20 years. And that way, at the end of the life of the corporation, it had to dissolve itself. It could create a new corporation and sell itself back to itself, but it had to go through this process so that the government could, evaluate if the corporation was operating in the benefit of the state. So number one, they had limited lifetimes. They couldn't live forever like they do now. Number two, they had to operate in a way that inured a benefit to the citizens of the state explicitly. Whether they made a profit or not was not so much the interest of the state, but if they hurt the state, they could get the corporate death penalty. They could be dissolved. Number three, it was a federal crime, actually. In 1907, it was called the Tillman Act. It was passed by Teddy Roosevelt for a corporation, any corporation in America, to give money to any political candidate for federal office. That was struck down by Citizens United in 2010, but that law was passed in 1907, the Tillman Act. So there were all these limits on corporate power, and states routinely gave corporations the death penalty for misbehaving, for lying, for cheating, for stealing. In the case of PG&E, they've actually killed people. They pled guilty to over 80 cases of manslaughter, and yet California has not chosen to give them the corporate death penalty. I think they should, frankly. So now we're hearing that the Trump Organization may get the corporate death penalty for all the crimes that they have committed. And the obvious ones that they're looking into right now, that Trump took the Fifth Amendment more than 400 times yesterday. Let that one sink in, Trump humpers. Those penalties, or that scam rather, appears to be what Michael Cohen told the whole world Trump had been doing in testimony before Congress back about 4 years ago, when he said that when Trump wanted to borrow money, he would inflate the value of his properties and claim that they were worth more than they were so he could borrow more money. And when it came time to pay taxes on his properties, he would deflate the value of them and lie about what they were worth to lower his tax payments. And those things are both crimes. They're both state and federal crimes. They're crimes against the tax code at the federal level, against the IRS. They're crimes against the state tax codes. And they're also crimes. It's also a crime called bank fraud and insurance fraud. He was also deflating and inflating the value of properties for insurance purposes. These are all major felonies for which there are, as we speak, people sitting in federal prison and in state prisons all over the country. And so I'm saying, Leticia James, go for it. We want to see this happen. We want to see the Trump Organization busted because, it could start a trend. I mean, it really could. It could start a really important trend that could travel all over the United States of corporations once again being evaluated, and people saying, hey, it's time to break some of these companies up, and it's time to kill some of them off. And I think it very much is. We need to go back to the laws that we had that protected us from these corporate predators throughout at least the first 150 years of American history. And so I'm calling for support for Leticia James, Attorney General Leticia James of New York, in considering the corporate death penalty for the Trump Organization. She already gave it to the Trump University, and she already gave the corporate death penalty to the Trump phony charity. So, Trump had two other scam corporations that no longer exist.